Jacksonville. The child was born but couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. Poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
On the 10th of August, 2019, the Weekman was from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth, as we normally are. This is a program that we summarize and add to the events that shaped the past week. And as we usually do, we start out with a song commemorating the work of one Stetson Kennedy. He was a man that single-handedly destroyed the Klan in the state of Georgia. He was a tireless anti-racist fighter when today we see these scourge of Nazism, nationalism, white supremacy, all going at once. DJ Trump visited the city of Dayton and the city of El Paso, Texas, in basically what was a photo op. He did not make public appearances. He talked with law enforcement officials and perhaps some of the people that were family of survivors and people that were killed. But that's not the question. What was looked at, and by even the commercial media, is the entire atmosphere. Presidents normally lead, particularly in opinion, or at least they can stimulate opinion. And through his Twitter account, now he's not using, like Barack Obama did, the presidential account. He's using a private account that he had before becoming the president of the United States. Now that begs a question within itself. Anytime you have an intersect of public and private, there is a problem. And this has been the nature of this regime since it took office in 2017. And the climate that was created in the 2016 presidential contest no doubt led to what happened in El Paso, Texas, and also in Dayton, Ohio. Now, his address there, where he talked about denouncing nationalism, white supremacy, well, then he backtracked and he talked about the writings of the gentleman in Dayton, Ohio, Aquifer. He talked about them, but Aquifer has demonstrated against racists, and they have confronted racists similarly to the John Brown brigade that we used to be in, brigade, John Brown anti-Klan brigade. The idea was to confront the Klan. And of course now you have and neo-Nazis, etc. would move around the nation, have the flags, etc., commemorating another anti-racist fighter, John Brown. If you recall, there are numerous video accounts of Union soldiers marching and singing John Brown's body. Now, Akiva is in the same tradition of those people that fought in a civil war, whereas you have the other side that is the white supremacists. They base their lineage, at least in the U.S., to the Civil War and the Nazi regime that was in a fascistic regime that was in the South. And that is the problem there at this juncture. When you try to recreate that type of history, the U.S. had an apartheid, an apartheid history up until the Brown decision, which Earl Warren championed there. He was a former Attorney General of California and Governor of California, was appointed to the Supreme Court, and he championed that particular decision, which began to unwind the official apartheid in the country. Now, you talk about de facto and de jure discrimination, but the problem there is, as far as hearts and minds, nothing changed. Atmosphere of hate remained in the South, and that is a variable we all talk about, and how it can be amplified. We saw that happen in the Balkans. Thousands of years, or at least hundreds of years, of that type of hate is intertwined. And of course that brings us to the issue of gun violence, obviously, and so-called gun control. Bringing out red flag laws, those are laws that allow the authorities or family members to go to court. Now this is the key. They have to go to court and remove firearms from some person's home or what have you on, generally speaking, a temporary basis. That is basically totally worthless. I'll say 90% worthless, a waste of time. And Elizabeth Warren has a more complete proposal, the registration, etc., there, and making it more of a national particular situation. Bumper stocks, banning those, and they need to ban some of the heavy-duty assault-type rifles, as was it happened under the Clinton administration. But these other proposals are nothing more than proposals, what we used to call happy talk, and that is all they are, is happy talk, and that leaves it at that juncture. As far as those two events, yes, they were fueled by hate. They were fueled by the small man theory, could have been the small woman theory of history, that you had individuals that were full of this thing called hate, and they manifested it, and that happens in an individualistic, libertarian type of society. You have these people out there that act out whatever situation they have. And the hate can be rational, or it can be irrational. Generally speaking, it's irrational. You have that as displayed by many that hate a particular individual, and that individual does not affect their lives other than they're perhaps in the media. This is what happened with President Obama, that the media was riled up's not a very good word, but anyway, amplified those people in the populace that could be amplified. And at the same time, on the other side, you had African Americans that for various reasons decided to attack Barack Obama. And why? Because they were permitted to by the mass media. They came up with all kinds of things. One fellow said, well, this is something needs to be said. Well, what needed to be said? What has Barack Obama done for us? Well, an interesting question, no doubt about that. But at the time he was President of the United States, the national leader was Dr. Al Sharpton of New York, that was addressing those types of problems that were specific to African Americans. But now that DJ Trump is there, they're not asking that question because DJ would just simply tell them to get lost, and they know it. So where are they in the scheme of things? The answer is nowhere. Period. There are some rumblings out there, such as some movements for reparations. We wrote a paper on reparations, I believe, was in 1972 or 73, making the legal case for reparations, and there's been people later on our financial channel, I don't know when it'll be, but we'll talk about the financial case for reparation. Now, many of the presidential candidates have various programs. Senator Booker has something called baby bonds, would give, I don't know, $1,000, whatever, to a African American child born, and of course that would add up if it were placed in an annuity, whatever. But as far as payments to individuals, that in the current atmosphere, now it doesn't address in a different atmosphere, would be utterly impossible. But that does not mean that one could not, should not propagandize behind it. There are groups that propagandize behind that. The former Representative John Conyers, he introduced a bill which was workable, and there was more support for that bill at the time he introduced it, over 20 years ago, than there would be today with the polarization. So once again, this is one of the political issues that is out there, and some people have made it their choice, which is positive. But as far as on the political horizon, it doesn't register very much, along with many other issues like the environment. And we'll go over a little polling here at some crosstabs and look at some of those. We don't do it today. We'll do it on the Monday Morning Quarterback or future programs that come about. Anyway, nonetheless, in Iowa, candidates are moving around. They have the Iowa State Fair, which is a big event, and all the candidates are there. And they had a dinner fundraiser in support of local Iowa candidates in the state of Iowa. Presidential candidates were there also. But one of the things to remember about Iowa is a rural state, largely a European state, and then you go to New Hampshire, basically the same thing. Now, the monopoly media has set those up as bellwethers. You have to do good in Iowa, usually get the first 5 seats out of there, and you have, quote-unquote, some momentum going into New Hampshire. But that doesn't necessarily work in modern times, because after you go there, you go to Nevada. Then you go to South Carolina. The Democratic Party in South Carolina, the African American Party, doesn't mean a whole lot in South Carolina. But as you come up to Super Tuesday in early March, it means a lot. It is a very big thing, because you have California, all these big states will be there. And what that means is a candidate has to have resources, cash on hand, supporters, organization, and in many different states. And after it is over, some of the candidates, as one will say, will fall out of it, period. So that is the early primaries. We'll put that down. Professor Amowitz, he's at the Emory University in Atlanta, had an excellent article there, scholarly article, on the impact of the so-called Russian interference. What he proved was, using his model and using a double regression, actually won't get much of that, but if you go to our Friday Java episode, we did append it to it, and you can read it under the auspices of the people at the University of Virginia, Charlottesville, Professor Sabato and his crystal ball. Well, basically what the crystal ball said, there was no evidence of Russian interference having an impact on the actual election itself. In fact, DJ Trump in the states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan underperformed, and won by a whole point. So when you look at the circumference of 60 or 80,000 votes that he won in those free states and gave him the presidency, that is the reason for that. Now, in the more we'll call National Enquirer type commercial thing, the case of Jeffrey Epstein is closed. Jeffrey Epstein took his life in his cell there in Manhattan. I believe he was still in Manhattan, or maybe he moved to Rikers. Anyway, he is dead. So effectively, that closes the case down, and there are some other ends to it. But the thing to remember, that was a criminal case. It had trafficking in there, but it really didn't benefit the Me Too movement very much. Now, we did a program that deals somewhat with the Me Too movement. Al Franken, a case of injustice. And that spells it out where Me Too was. Was Me Too a fad or not? Well, there was some fad there. There was a lot of good legal work done and continuing, but unfortunately, the way that the national media, the monopoly media handles things, Me Too had its day in the sunlight, and now you're not hear very much about it. It sort of died out, or is dying out, like the Occupy movement was. Thus you go from one crisis to the next crisis, to one spotlight or one candlelight or what have you there. Now, the monopoly media, of course, pushed Epstein's case because Epstein was a celebrity. He was connected to many, many people, period, including, what was it, Prince, one of the Prince characters. In the UK was evidently, they tried to connect him up in some civil court papers that have been unlocked, or what do you want to call it. Anyway, those are sometimes what we call side issues that are really not that important in the scheme of things. Let's go to Jesse Jackson. Emma Young, the Chicago ad lady, posted on Facebook about something about Jesse talking about Joe Lunchbox Biden being based in the 50s. And I sent it on to our pal H, and H told me that further investigation was needed. Well, we'll look into that. But again, Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe as he's called, he will be the spotlight. That's what happens when you're the front runner in Iowa. Anyway, to Jesse Jackson. Jesse was at the Warsaw site at also Auschwitz. God, Auschwitz. Let me get my glasses on here. Birkenau site in Poland. He was there, and he was joined by survivors paying homage to often forgotten genocide, that of the Roma people. This was the 75th anniversary. In addition to 6 million Jewish people killed in death camps, as Auschwitz, the Nazis killed other groups of oppressed minorities, including between 250 to a half million Roma and Sintis. Sintis are people who arrived, from India and settled in Western and Central Europe many centuries ago, while the Romas are centered largely in Eastern Europe, since the term gypsy is considered offensive. These groups are usually collectively referred to as Romas. Reverend Jackson drew, this is from the Washington Post, incident, a comparison between the suffering of long persecuted minorities in Europe with that of African Americans. In turn, a German Roma leader named Ronnie Ross said African American civil rights struggle that made vast achievements in the 20th century was model inspired and inspiration for his people who still face marginalization and violence. Bowing his head as he began to visit ahead of official ceremonies, the 77-year-old Jesse Jackson prayed that such horrors never occur again. He appeared deeply moved as he visited the surviving gas chambers, crematories, and toured an exhibit depicting the mass murder of Romans. Incidentally, communists were also murdered there in the Nazis' campaign during the official ceremony in front of the memorial to Sintis and Roma dead amidst the ruins of the gas chambers and barracks. Jackson warned diplomats and Romans from across Europe of the current dangers from the resurgence of racism and white nationalism. The ugly head of racism, nationalism, and neo-Nazism is rending up again in Europe and America. It may be a mass murder at a church in Charlottesville. Neo-Nazis and racists chanting Jews will not replace us in Charlottesville. The crowds demoralizing our congressional representatives today with chants to send them back home. That's what the crowd chants at a recent rally by DJ Trump after he hurled racist insults at Ilhan Omar and 3 other congressional women of color. She is from Somalia. The other women, respectively, were from Detroit, the Motor City, from the Bronx, Queens, and also from Boston via Cincinnati. Anyway, the ceremony in southern Poland was which was under German occupation in World War II, fell exactly 75 years after thousands of the last remaining prisoners in the so-called Gypsy family camp at Auschwitz and Birkenau were killed. Organizers said around 20 survivors, most of them Roma, Sintis, and some Jewish joined the ceremony. One survivor who spoke was Elsie Baker, who was sent alone at age to Auschwitz after being labeled half-caste gypsy by the Nazi regime. Now nearly blind, she expressed gratitude to those who gathered to mourn. She said later in England, where she lived since the 60s, nobody had a clue about what people like her had witnessed during the war. Members of Roma community faced deportation, sterilizations, and mass shootings in Soviet-occupied territories, as well as the Nazi gas chambers. Still, despite the immense suffering, it took decades for them to achieve it in small measures of recognition. It was only in 1982. Now, about the Soviet-occupied territories there, some of that is red baiting, no doubt about that. The German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt publicly declared that the Sintis and Romas were persecuted for reason of race, and that these crimes constitute an act of genocide. More progress has come of late. In 2012, Germany erected a memorial in Berlin. 3 years later, the European Parliament declared the 2nd of August to be European Roma Holocaust Memorial Day, and this year, before the International Roma Day, was on April the 8th. Even old Mike Pompeo called Friday for all governments to take steps to combat intolerance against Romas, to enable their full participation in civil and economic life. The Pope Francis highlighted discrimination that Romans still face today in Rome. Asked how he felt about the memorial, like the one Friday, a 94-year-old French Roma survivor, Raymond Gumi, simply pressed his hand to his heart and bowed his head. This is by the Associated Press and was in the Washington Post. Picture of Reverend Jackson and Vanessa Gratter on the 2nd of August. We found this, so we thought we would bring this up since Jesse's name was connected with Joe Lunchbox Biden, and see where that took us. We'll hit on the local newspaper here. Democracy is about to die in Youngstown with the closing of a local newspaper there. Incidentally, Gannett, who has many newspapers, bought out Youngstown, Ohio area residents attended a meeting following the announcement that the Vindicator newspaper would be closing. And mere moments after the start of hastily called community forum, and tears started to flow. Gamak was how one Youngstown reader described her horrified reaction to the surprise announcement just days before that the city's 150-year-old newspaper, The Vindicator, would publish its last publication on the 31st of August. Mary Bev Earnhardt, who teaches journalism at Youngstown State University, briefly left the room at the local historic center to pull itself together. Vindy connected us, and we've done stories on Vindy. The paper's demise, another blow for the region, hit hard by early this year by the shutdown of the sprawling General Motors plant in Lordstown. That's a 20-minute drive from downtown, which once employed 14,000 people. The plant made the Chevrolet Cruze, and part of the Rust Belt's manufacturing sector that old DJ Trump vowed to bring back. The Vindicator's closing, Youngstown would become one and unfortunate first, a good-sized city with no daily newspaper. The metro area has a half million of people. The city's 65,000. Many other newspapers have folded in recent years. As the billionaire Buffett said, newspapers are toast. Given the dire state of the industry, it certainly will not be the first or the last to close, period. More likely this will look like the tumbling of the first domino there. Mark Brown, the Vindicator's general manager, the loss is personally devastated. He told us his family has owned that newspaper for 132 years. His mother, Betty Brown Jagnow, the publisher, is well into her 80s. Still comes into office regularly and calls the decision gut-wrenching, no doubt about that. They had lost money for several years. Brown realized 5 years ago he probably should put the Vindicator up for sale. 44 people in the newsroom dug deep into local issues. Still, the Vindicator has lost money for 20 of the past 22 years. Even its richest in 1989, the profit margin was a mere 17%. That's about half of what American newspapers were pulling in their pre-internet heyday, when advertisers had little choice but to reach customers. Circulation had plummeted from 100,000 and 160,000 on Sundays in the late 70s to 25,000 daily and 32 on Sundays. The Brown family got serious about selling, hiring a broker, and that was 2017. Two potential buyers took a serious look but dropped out. After spending $23 million to cover losses to buy a new press that was in 2010, Brown found himself out of options. Sad. This means, said Joe Kaplan, he's Associate Dean of Syracuse University Newhouse School, is that no one in the community will be covering on a regular basis school board meetings, city council meetings, cops and courts. Democracy as we know it is about to die in Youngstown. The city and its surrounding Mahoning Valley have an ugly history of corruption. Crime Town, USA, the city fell in love with the mob, and was how the New Republic magazine described Youngstown in 2000. The late Jim Capitan, expelled as a member of Congress and sent to prison after being convicted of bribing, falsifying income tax, racketeering, caused his staff do chores on his Ohio farm and a houseboat in Washington. Jim Traficant. We remember old Jim Traficant. Anyway, he was from there. Youngstown rally, Youngstown was near lost for DJ Trump after going big for Barack Obama. Trump, of course, took Ohio overall. Trump's rally drew 7,000. They cheered as he vowed to resuscitate the local factory. He didn't do it. D'Souza predicted Trump will win in Mahoning County next year, despite empty promises, despite the raft of for sale signs on houses in Lordstown. The chances are the Vindicator won't be there to cover the results, no doubt about that. The nearby Warren newspaper may expand to Youngstown, and the local business journal has pledged to fill some of the void. We'll be doing that. There's been no profit for a long time, and the Vindicator had a generous local benefactor, Mark Brown. So that is the story of the Vindicator and where the Vindicator was. We're going to have something on the small time press town press. Let me, excuse me, and move along here. I don't know. Okay, for some reason the Cook stuff is not coming up here. We'll go to it in a minute here. Anyway, we'll move along here. We will honor Toni Morrison. We'll get to that in a minute. Let me see now. We can find old Uncle Carl here, and we should mention the state of Mississippi. What's basically happened there? After almost 700 people were detained, around 300 were sent back home. This is from WLBT in Mississippi. The Mississippi Department of Child Protection is now providing translators to help those involved in the ICE raids. The translators are being provided to the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Canton. It's a faith-based group to end the ICE raids that took place, of course, Wednesday morning. 680 were detained. Beginning Monday, will be circulating flyers in English and Espanol, phone numbers for detained families. This is the latest there. And the infamous Koch brothers, who known as Koch Foods there, is holding a jobs fair on a Monday. Very interesting situation there. This jobs fair coming up, announced on Facebook that this is dated the 9th of August, that the company will hold a jobs fair after many workers at the 2 Mississippi plants were detained in the immigration raids earlier in the week. The raids took place on Wednesday morning at 7 locations in Mississippi. 680 people were detained. Koch will host a job fair on Monday the 12th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Forest Wind Job Center. Applicants will need to provide 2 forms of valid ID when applying. Interesting there. The Koch Food said that they are cooperating with federal government's ongoing investigation, and they are diligent about complying with state and local federal employment eligibility law. They use the E-Verify database to screen new hires. It has been said whether or not any of the companies that employed the people have been detained. The HSS website enforcement efforts are equally focused on aliens who unlawfully seek work in the U.S. as well as employees who knowingly hire them. That's Homeland Security's New Orleans Special Agent in charge, Miles. So they are based in Park Ridge, Illinois, one of the largest poultry producers in the U.S., employs 13,000 people. We had operations in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, Ohio, and Tennessee. That is Koch Foods. We had to bring Koch Foods into the scenario here. We'll come back to some of the election stuff here. See if we can find Uncle Carl Robe. Where is Uncle? Let me go through some of the polling here, and we'll find Uncle Carl somewhere. This is from USA. This is from Survey USA. This is a poll that they have. This hour, 6 months until polls in Iowa caucuses. Anyway, Joe Biden, who first announced presidency 22 years ago, and this particular poll was conducted the 1st of August through the 5th. The following Democratic candidates there, and this is what they have: Biden at 33, Bernie at 20, Elizabeth Warren at 19. That means they're pretty much neck and neck. Kamala Harris at 9, Buttigieg at 8. There in this, Biden has 40% or more amongst seniors, 43% amongst moderns, and 44% with high school graduates, and 42% amongst evangelicals, 46, amongst Protestants, 12% there. Sanders, Warren, Gillibrand, de Blasio exceed 45%. Biden outpace Biden 35 to 30 among single parents. Warren does not break 30% in any demographics according to this. but has disproportionate support amongst women at 22, independents at 24, single voters at 20, Catholics at 22. Amongst self-described poor voters, 22%, amongst Catholic middle-class voters, 23%. And in the LGBTQ households, 25%. Warren finished in first place, normally both Biden and Sanders, with twice the support of Buttigieg, who is openly gay. 52% says Biden has the best chance to defeat DJ Trump. 12% said Sanders has the best chance to defeat him, and 11% for Warren. Let's see here. Repair damage. These are some of the issues here done by the previous president. 43%. Reduce the income disparities between rich and poor, 14%. Embrace all Americans, 11%. Restore the rule of law, 6%. And others at 13% there. So this is basically that particular survey. Let's go to Real Clear here while we are here. And seems kind of redundant in itself, but some of the polls and where the actual polls were last week. We have a number of polls here on, this is on Wednesday. We went over these before, so we won't go back there. We spent some time here. This is a Survey USA poll. Very long poll. We basically went over that and make sure that Harris at 9, Buttigieg at 8. This is a USA Survey USA poll. Beto O'Rourke at 1, Senator Booker at 1, and this is the national one. Amy Klobuchar at 1 also. Now the general election here has Biden up by 8, has Bernie up by 8, has Warren up by 2, and Harris up by 1. Buttigieg, DJ Trump leads him by 2. And in North Carolina, this is Civitas poll, USA Today, has Biden up by 8. This is in North Carolina. Bernie Sanders by 4 in North Carolina. Elizabeth Warren by 1. And Trump by 1 in that against Kamala Harris in North Carolina. And Buttigieg up by 2. Now here we go here. Now this is out in California. KGTV there, and US Survey USA has Biden by 34 points there. Bernie Sanders by 33 is in California. Elizabeth Warren by 28. Kamala Harris by 29. Buttigieg by 23. This was on Friday, Friday's poll. Okay, on Thursday, we did this, the Mamak poll. This is Iowa caucuses here. Biden's up by 9, Liz Warren 19, Harris 11, Bernie at 9, Buttigieg at 8, Amy Klobuchar at 3. She needs to do a little bit better there, but she's coming up in the polls. And in California, a very close race in California, according to KGTV and Survey USA. Biden's up by 4 there. Then comes these 25, Kamala Harris. 21, Liz Warren. 18, Bernie Sanders. Buttigieg at 6 in the single digits. And we did North Carolina. Pennsylvania. This is Franklin Marshall. Biden's home state. He's up by 7 there. 28, 21, Liz Warren. Bernie at 12. Harris at 8. Buttigieg at 6. And so forth and so on. Approval rating there. DJ Trump's at 41, 55% disapprove. This is Morning Consult, Politico on Thursday. The Hill has him at 45. He goes up and down in those particular situations. Now let me do Bloomberg here. Hopefully we can get this up. The title of the article is This Week has produced already. This week has already produced 3 bad signs for a Trump re-election. I thought we would get to this one. And some of the actual things here. Touchdown El Paso. This is DJ Trump amongst the national fury over racist gun massacres, a plunging stock market, and growing signs that trade war will with China will fail to produce the historic deal he promised. Each of these three developments hurts his standing with key voter groups. In Texas, El Paso, and Dayton, Ohio, Trump's reluctance to push strong on gun measures is likely to exacerbate collapsing GOP support among suburban voters in last fall's midterm election that happened there. Republicans were routed in suburban districts from Orange County to Dallas to Jersey. Republicans are headed for extinction in the surveys if they don't distance themselves from NRA and put forth solutions to help eradicate gun violence epidemic. That is from Dan Eberhard, a major Republican donor and a supporter. That's a big risk for DJ Trump and the Republicans. In the past, Gallup finds that gun control has gained salience as a voting issue over the past 2 decades. And it has included districts close to Dallas, Houston, and of course the one stretching to suburban San Antonio. So that's changing what's happening down in Texas. On Monday, their plight worsened when U.S. trade rival said it would suspend all imports of American agricultural products. In a response, this is China, and DJ Trump's going to place 10% on 100 billion of Chinese products. China's announcement that it will not buy any agricultural products is a body blow to thousands of farmers and ranchers who are already struggling to get by. This is from the American Farm Bureau's president, Zippy Duvall. Last spring, a Bloomberg survey of 30 congressional districts, mostly relying on soybeans, found Republicans controlled 25 of them. Although Democrats have made large gains in midterm elections, their gains didn't extend deep into farm country, so I guess they'll stay the course. Despite the campaign, Trump blasted China for declines in U.S. manufacturing jobs. This is again back to Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So far, those negotiations, of course, have backfired. There's nothing happened. Trump needs to help. Disrupting supply chains in the short run will impact corporate profits, business confidence, demand. This is according to the chief economist for Bloomberg, Carl Riccandonna. Anyway, you can write in a minute here. But sudden perception drop began during the previous fall in the opposite direction. This is Midwest manufacturing. Riccandonna, along with China hawks in the White House, point out that the trade war, the country's deficit has more leverage than surplus with China, but in political context, the vast meaning will only in the long run. Timeline is shorter. This is for DJ Trump. Trump repeated attempts to drive China to the bargaining table with punitive tariffs and bullying tweets are having the desired effect. He appears to be producing the opposite effect, noting the hype in U.S.-China trade tensions. As Goldman Sachs said in one of their notes, we no longer expect a trade deal before the 2020 election. It would be very wise not to make one. He has 15 months before the election. You can count on support of millions of diehards who won't be swayed by that. Well, there's no doubt about that. Well, yeah. Let me get this one in here quickly here. This is the Little League World Series, the latest we have. We'll have more on the Monday morning quarterback. Nonetheless, August the 7th. Let's see, Midland, Texas 2, River Ridge, Louisiana 6, South Riding, Virginia 12, Peachtree City, Georgia 2. That's a final. August the 8th, Johnston, Iowa 3, Coon Rapids, Minnesota 1, Guffstown, New Hampshire 2, Burlington, Rhode Island 1. That's the final there. Salem, Oregon 8, and 5 for Condon, Idaho. I always mispronounce that. Bowling Green, Kentucky 5, and Clay City, Michigan 3. That's the final there. Haverstraw, New York 5, and Washington D.C. 4. In 4. Wakalaka, Hawaii 13, and Roseville, California 3 and 5. That was on the 8th, and on the 9th, Coon Rapids, Minnesota 9, Webb City, Missouri 0, Madison, Connecticut, and Burlington, Rhode Island was 5 there, and Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is 12, and Bethel, Washington 9. Okay, River Forest, Illinois 0, and Clay City 0. Oh, okay, those games are not completed. Anyway, we have that series over finally, and let me look without taking a station break here. I think we'll take the Charlie Cook because we're running a little late on time here. Package on the Monday Morning Quarterback. We'll have the latest from Uncle Carl. I think Uncle is down here. Yeah, we'll get Uncle Carl up here. Okay, let me just take a station break here. I'll be right back. Okay, Uncle Carl is writing. Carl Rove is writing in the Wall Street Journal on the 8th August 2019. Words that heal and words that don't. A friend of mine who lives in Texas, a representative of voters who have decided of the presidential race 2020. He supports many of President Trump's policies, but winces at his behavior, words, and on presidential tone. You'd think Democratic candidates would be trying to gain votes, or at least multiply their doubts about Trump instead of they lose all sense of proportion. Many blame the mass shootings in El Paso on the president. They say he's a racist who motivates other racists to go out shooting sprees. To my friend, these statements come across as reckless and irresponsible. What Democrats are doing is bad politics, and more important, it's wrong. Unfortunately, we are well past the point when politicians would stay silent long enough to let the victims' families, friends grieve in peace. I get that over-the-top rhetoric may help improve some Democrats' chances to win a nomination, but it seems more of these White House hopefuls struggle for attention, the more extreme and desperate they get. I want to say with moral clarity that Donald Trump is responsible. This is from Senator Booker. Declaration of the shooting. The Mayor Pete Buttigieg echoed the sentiment, argument the president at best is condoling and encouraging white nationalists like the Texas shooter. Beto O'Rourke responded to a question about Trump with anger. You call BS. He's been saying he's calling Mexican immigrants racist and criminals. I don't know, like members of the press. That's what the F, and we know what Beto was saying, is in K, demanding that the reporter connect the dots. He accused the president of inciting racism and violence. Elizabeth Warren said the president has created plenty of space for hate. Bernie Sanders, we have a president who is a racist. Both explored the massacre of Ian campaign emails that she to raise money for senatorial Democrats. He for online petition demanding Trump names are collected for future fundraising. Then Joe Biden piles on, telling Iowa rally how far is it for Trump saying that that it is an invasion to the shooter, declaring this attack is response to Hispanic invasion of Texas, not far at all. Right after his speech, Joe Biden sent out a fundraiser embracing the remarked fundraiser there. Well, DJ Trump does the same thing. There is more than a whip of opportunism here. No one would or should hold Liz Warren or Bernie Sanders responsible for the Dayton shooters murdered, though social media posts apparently revealed he was a leftist who praised violence. Again, he's back on the same talking point as DJ Trump of Aquifer here movement, and is a fan of the two senators. Similarly, no one should hold Sanders responsible for shooting at GOP congressman's who was a fascist baseball president. That's old Steve Scalise. To their credit, Kamala Harris, former housing secretary, Julian Castro were less strident. Harris said only that the president does not understand that the responsibility comes from his office. Castro admitted the person that is responsible for the shooting is the shooter. Barack Obama seemed to take a different approach than most of the party's candidates. He tweeted that he shared the country's grief, then while acknowledging there's no way to stop every deranged individual, he called for gun control and properly labeled the El Paso shooting an example of a troubled individuals who embrace racist ideologies, having and been radicalized by white nationalism websites. This retires a better strategy to reduce the influence of hate groups. So far and so good. Well, Uncle Carl is walking around this. This whole situation was created by DJ Trump, his comments about Charlottesville and his long list of those, and from his Burford campaign he was on. And if you really want to go back, what happened with the Central Park 5 outrageous situation, that's what Goebbels, the chief propagandist for Adolf Schickengruber, otherwise known as Hitler, did. When you raise these concerns, Schickengruber did not have Twitter and Facebook. So you amplify it by 100 and even 1,000%. Just understand what's going on here. During Tricky Dickey's campaign, Law and Order, it was amplified, but there were virtually only a few cable stations, media stations there. Talk radio was not what it turned out to be. During Reagan, that's when talk radio came in. That was the internet at the time. There was no internet. But these types have been around for a very, very long time, and for various reasons they were motivated. We at BRN and the Boston Red Network have talked about this in detail. We went on polls, Professor Amowitz's work, and various others, Mr. Dr. Slides and his work. So we'll continue to do this. Let me just get the baseball scores from last night, and we'll end the broadcast here. And here we are. This is on Friday. Let's see what we got going here. The Padres 7-9 over the Rockies. The Phillies and Giants in San Francisco. Phillies 9-6. The Athletics and White Sox on the south side of Chicago, and they shut out the White Sox 7-zip. The Astros and Orioles in a Camden Yard. Astros 3-0 there. Yankees were in Toronto game. I tuned into the final score. That was 8-2. Toronto. The Sox had a slugfest in Fenway Park at 16-4. The line score was the Red Sox, that is, 14 hits and no errors, and the Angels 3 hits and 2 errors there. The Tigers are 5-2 over the struggling Kansas City. Both teams are struggling there. And the Nationals and Mets, it was the Mets 7-6. Atlanta and the Marlins in Florida, it was 8-4 Atlanta. The Cubs were bested by the Reds 5-2. Trevor Bauer fanned 11 in the Reds' home debut on a Friday night there in Cincy. The Brewers win 6-5 over the Rangers in Milwaukee. Eric Fume hit a game-ending homer, I guess what we normally call a walk-up on a 6-5. And Cleveland beat the Twins in Minnesota 6-2. They are now tied there. And in St. Louis, the Cardinals 6-2 over the Pirates. That is the baseball scores. We'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback on Monday morning on our political side of WBRN Radio, and on the numbers man side, which is the economic program here. And we didn't get Toni Morrison. We'll get Toni. She died at 88 in New York. A Pulitzer Prize winner. And we'll talk about her on the Monday morning quarterback there. And some of the comments from Professor Ishmael Reed of Oakland. He literally stayed at her home in New York back in, I believe, April of this year. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday morning quarterback.